Welcome to Permission to Breathe, a transformative podcast dedicated to providing a safe space where you can inhale deeply and exhale freely while embracing your grief journey unapologetically. I am your host, Dr. Tammy Isaac, a spiritual practitioner, grief advocate and educator, author, and your guide on this journey through grief. This space was born out of the understanding that grief is not just an event, it's a lifelong unfolding. It's layered, it's complex, and often it's silence. And here is where we disrupt the silence. We will talk about the grief that lingers after the food stops arriving at your door, the grief that remains when no one calls and no one comes by to check on you. The grief that's complicated, the grief that's ancestral, the grief that lives in your body long before it ever reaches your tears. Every episode, we honor the humanity of grief, the anger, the confusion, the numbness, the longing, and we do so without apology. Whether you're navigating fresh loss, unspoken sorrow, or the weight of a world that just won't pause, this podcast invites you to sit down, breathe deeply, and give yourself the permission you've been waiting for to grieve, to feel, to breathe. Let's begin. Are you grieving and feel like you're struggling alone? You don't have to walk this path by yourself. Book a virtual session with Dr. Tammy Isaac at Breathe Grief Counseling Center. Visit us online at www.breathegriefcounselingcenter.com. Dr. Isaac will help you put your emotions into words. She'll help you reduce the feeling of isolation. She'll help you understand that everyone grieves differently and also help you prevent unhealthy coping mechanisms. Take control of your life with world-class counseling sessions today with Dr. Tammy Isaac. Today, we're stepping into a tender, often unseen corner of grief, and that's caregiver grief. It's the kind of grief that can live quietly in your chest while your hands are busy folding laundry, measuring medication, or even helping someone stand. It's the ache that shows up when you leave the hospital after visiting your parent, or when you tuck your child in after another hard day of illness, or when you get into your car after a long shift caring for patients you've grown to love. Caregiving grief doesn't always begin with the final goodbye. It begins in the thousand small losses you witness every single day. The independence that slips away, the conversations that grow shorter, the laughter that becomes frequent. It's the grief of watching someone you love change before your eyes and knowing you can't turn the clock back. Whether you stepped into caregiving because of family or you chose it as your life's work, this journey carries a love so fierce it can leave you breathless at times, and a cost that is so high it can leave you empty. And yet, in the middle of the exhaustion, the worry, and the wondering if you're doing enough, you keep showing up. Today, I want to honor that. I want to talk about the courage it takes to keep giving, the struggles you rarely speak out loud, the risk and the quiet rewards, the role of faith when you feel like you're running out of strength, and why rest and community aren't luxuries, they're your lifelines. So today, this is your space, your permission to breathe, and your reminder that grief you carry matters too. Let's get started. Caregiving isn't something you wake up one day and casually decide to do. It's something that grows in the deepest parts of you, often long before you realize it actually has a name. It begins with compassion, not the kind that is simply kind or polite, but the kind that moves you. Compassion that won't let you walk away when someone is struggling. Compassion that makes you rearrange your entire life just to meet someone else's needs. This kind of care is costly, not because it takes from you without return, but because it demands the most precious things you have: your time, your energy, your patience, and even your heart. It's the willingness to put your own comfort on hold so someone else can be comfortable. It's the determination to learn medical terms you never thought you need, right? To master equipment you never imagined using, and to advocate in doctors' offices until your voice is hoarse. The drive to care doesn't always come from a place of ease. Sometimes it's born from watching someone you love suffer and deciding you will not let them walk through it alone. Other times it's born from a God given calling, an inner conviction that says, this is what I was made to do. For those who choose caregiving as a profession, nurses, hospice workers, home health aides, chaplains, the drive is often fueled by a blend of skill and soul. You don't just care because you know how, you care because you can't not care. And for family caregivers, the drive comes from love that is too strong to be passive. You may not have gone to school for this, but your heart became your credential. You learned by doing, you grew by showing up, you stayed because the bond you share will not let you go. And at its core, caregiving is an act of sacred compassion, the kind that changes you, stretches you, and in many ways defines you. Caregiving is a journey marked by immense love and profound cost. It's a long, unpredictable road filled with invisible burdens that stretch your body, mind, and spirit. Physically, it can feel like you are living in a state of constant alertness. A seminal study by Schulitz and colleagues described caregiving as all the features of a chronic stress experience that takes both a physical and psychological toll over time. For those caring for individuals with advanced illnesses like cancer, research shows that the greater the burden, the more likely it is to be accompanied by anxiety, depression, and a decline in overall quality of life. There's also sleep deprivation, which is common. Nearly 90% of caregivers report losing significant rest, and over 80% experience health issues directly tied to the demands of caregiving. But the weight isn't only physical. There is an emotional grief that begins long before any final goodbye, what researchers call anticipatory grief. Studies have found that heavier caregiver burden predicts stronger anticipatory grief, while healthy family communication and strong support networks can also help buffer the impact of it. Now, this is especially true in situations of ambiguous loss, when the person you care for is physically present but has changed in ways that feel irreversible. They're no longer the same. And you find yourself grieving who they once were, who they now are, and who they will yet become. So let's imagine the caregiver rising before dawn, already weary, preparing medication, balancing meals, and silencing their own physical aches, while their heart carries this anticipatory grief for what's fading slowly but surely. Nights are restless, their body weakened not just by time, but by the silent sacrifice. Emotionally, the caregiver navigates unpredictable mood swings from the person they're caregiving for and their own burst of compassion, fatigue. Burnout flares without warning, leaving them fragile and raw. If they're part of the sandwich generation, the boundaries blur entirely. So childcare, elder care, job, bills stacked until there's almost no air left, right? Their spirit weathers under the weight. Over time, this emotional strain can lead to compassion fatigue, a deep depletion from continually holding space for another's suffering. Clinical reports show that more than 60% of caregivers experience burnout, marked by mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion. Now, the financial strain only compounds the pressure. The family stress model reminds us that economic pressure can heighten emotional distress, and it can erode relationships and also amplify the already heavy load that you're already carrying. But amid the strain of things, there's a powerful reminder. Strong support can be a lifeline. So when families communicate, problem solve, and share resources, research shows the emotional battering, it begins to lessen, and the caregiver's quality of life is stronger. And the struggles, they're real, but so are the networks of care that can actually help carry the weight. Caregiving is a calling that changes you, and not always in ways that feel uplifting. The risks are real, and if we're honest, they can be just as enduring as the rewards. For some, caregiving is chosen, a deliberate embrace of a calling or profession, but for others, caregiving is inherited by circumstance. They step into the role simply because there's no one else. Maybe they're the only child, the most stable one, the sibling with more financial means, the oldest in the family, or the one living closest to mom or dad. They may not have planned for it, but life's circumstances place the responsibility squarely in their hands. Regardless of how it begins, the risks are profound. Burnout, the complete depletion of mental, emotional, and physical energy. And that's very much common. Studies show that caregivers, especially those providing 20 or more hours of care per week, are at risk, significantly higher risk for chronic health problems such as high blood pressure, weakened immune function, and even heart disease. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, and lack of exercise often follow, not because caregivers don't care for themselves, but because their loved ones' needs feel more urgent than their own. Emotional strain also takes its toll. So caregivers are more likely to experience depression and anxiety compared to the general population, with research indicating that rates nearly double that of non-caregivers. The emotional labor of constant vigilance, decision making, and witnessing decline can be relentless. Without intentional self care and support, that emotional weight can become very isolating. And this is something that I understood early on as I began my work in chaplaincy within the hospice field. One of the things I realized is that you're talking about death and dying all day, every day, 5 days. Well, for me, 5 days a week. And whenever I was on call for the weekends, every conversation, every meeting is about death and dying. There is no conversation about healing and restoration. And so you have this gloom of conversation that is hanging over you every day. And you have to have some type of self-care and support that's going to help bear the emotional weight that you have to deal with day in and day out. That's why I say that working in hospice or with, palliative or patients, like in ICU, and dealing with patients that are very sick chronically and are moving toward death and require so much care, you have to have self-care, but also know that that is the field for you so that you can balance things out. Sometimes that type of work is not for you, and you realize that maybe I need to move to a different area of care because this is a bit too much weight, especially as I think about or begin to balance my work life along with my personal life, because you're dealing with both. Okay. Um, Social relationships also can erode too. Friendships fade when invitations are repeatedly declined, and the outside world can begin to feel distant and disconnected. And this isolation deepens the sense that no one truly understands what you're actually carrying. And I will say for this, and I've never really spoken about this, I feel like during the season of caring for my dad and then caring for my mom, I was also in school. I worked in full time ministry. And so I was very regimented and had a system of what I was going to do. You know, get up in the mornings. I would go to the hospital with my mom, with my dad. I would drop her off there, visit with him for a little bit. I would leave there, go to work. I also had school and papers. And then I would leave work, go back to the hospital at night, visit with my dad, pick my mom up, and then come back home. And you have to make sure she had her own health conditions to make sure that she was eating healthy and having the things that she needed, not just throughout the day, but also at home. And so trying to balance relationships and having a social life was just not something that I had. And I know like a lot of people would invite me and people would always, even, in when I was working in full-time ministry, being over the young adults, and they would always have things outside, but I couldn't attend. And I don't think they really understood the pressure or the weight that I was experiencing, because of course I never talked about it with them. But I don't think they understood that. And I think that in a way might have fractured some relationships, but I still very much care about them even today. And I wish them the best, but I was very heavy with responsibility and I didn't have time for a social life with school and work. And then one of the things I did do for self-care, I ran a lot. And so I would run and then run in races, but then eventually that became a bit too much. And the responsibilities that I had were overwhelming, that I didn't even have time to run or even train to run. So eventually that fell off the plate as well. And so it just begins to isolate you. And so my circle was just work, home with mom, hospital with dad, and school, right? And then, whatever responsibilities I needed to take care of around the house. And that was my life. I didn't really have anything outside of that. So when, my dad died, when my mom died, I don't feel like those who are my close friends that I say now were actually present for me in those moments. And it might have been because of that isolation and whatever they may have had going on in their own lives. But when I think about those that were there for me in the loss of my dad, or, the loss of my mom, which was one of the hardest losses that I had to experience, there's only less than a handful of people that I can say I felt like was actually there for me. And none of those are people that I call close friends today. Now let's move forward and talk about the rewards. Alongside the risks are also rewards that are hard to measure but deeply felt. So there's the profound satisfaction of knowing you showed up for someone in their most vulnerable moments. The quiet triumph of mastering a skill you never thought you could, actually learn. The deepened bond that comes from sharing both struggle and joy, even in small doses. Now, some caregivers speak of the gift of perspective, how caregiving reshapes their understanding of time, gratitude, and what truly matters. Others find that the intimacy of care brings moments of connection that actually outweigh weeks of exhaustion, like the warm squeeze of a hand, the flicker of recognition in fading eyes, a whisper thank you, the lingers, in your heart for years after they're gone. And there's the spiritual reward, the sense of fulfilling a sacrifice, a sacred calling, I want to say. And many caregivers describe their work as an act of service to God, an offering of love that is lived out in action. It's not about perfection, but it's actually just about the presence. When I think about the rewards for me, even though it was very hard, one of the things I always say to people who still have their parents is that or still have the loved one is to find the gratefulness in those moments, because when they're gone, that's going to be hard. Now that my parents are gone and I am looking back at how tough and how hard it was for me, I still say I would do it all over again, because I do count it an honor and a sacrifice to be able to care for those who once cared for me as a child. And those memories in the moment is very tough. And I'm going to say that I'll be honest about it. It's very tough in the moment. But when I sit today and think about it, I'm so glad I have those memories to think about, because it brings me so much joy and pleasure. And it gives me the satisfaction of knowing that I did everything that I could to care for my mom and my dad. And I know that they are pleased with the work that I put into of really caring for them. And even as I'm thinking about it or even discussing, I become emotional because I'm so fulfilled by the sacrifice, while also thinking about the struggle um, that I had to go through to really care for them. It was very exhausting, very overwhelming, and still trying to balance what I was trying to do in my own life to have the career that I have. Um, but I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the moments that my mom would thank me. You know, I remember a time she called to thank me. I couldn't make it to a doctor's appointment with her, so she had to go, but she had to call me on the phone while she was there. And, she got some really good news, because I had her on a particular eating regimen, watching what she was eating, balancing how much liquid. And the doctor told her, hey, whatever your daughter's doing and telling you to do, keep doing it, because your numbers are looking better. And the moment that my mom had to say, thank you for what you've been doing, because man, she was not an easy patient to take care of. And she didn't like a lot of things that I was suggesting or having her to do. And so when she said thank you, that meant so much to me, to have your mother, someone who raised you, who taught you, who trained you, to turn around and then say thank you for what you're doing. Like, that is amazing to me. And it makes me emotional even now, and makes me feel powerful and strengthened in the work that I'm doing. And it kind of overshadows all of the negative parts, the stress, the struggle, the fights, the frustration, because of that one powerful moment that she realized that everything that I was doing was because I really loved and cared for her. So I think you do have to kind of change your perspective in the midst of it. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think that if you can find places that will ground you and anchor you in the midst of it, it will be much more helpful, and you'll be able to hold to those memories once they are gone. Now, the truth is, when we think about the tension between the two, the risk and the rewards often very much coexist. Like I was just saying, like, we can feel deep joy in the relationship while still feeling really utterly worn down by the demands. And you can be grateful for the time together while also grieving the way life has changed, because caregiving is rarely either or. It's almost always both and. So acknowledging this tension doesn't diminish your love. It simply honors the full truth of your actual experience, that caregiving is both a burden and a blessing. And your humanity lives in the space between the two. And it's the same thing that I say for grief. You can hold joy and sorrow in the same space at the same time. For many caregivers, faith isn't just a comfort, it's the lifeline that keeps them standing when everything else feels unsteady. It's the whispered prayer at 3 a.m. when you're watching over a restless loved one. It's the scripture that comes to mind when you feel like you've given all you have and there's still more to do. It's the reminder that you are seen by God, even when it feels like no one else notices the sacrifice you're making. Faith anchors caregivers in purpose. It reframes the work as more than a task or a list or a duty. It becomes an act of service, an offering of love. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. For many, this verse becomes a quiet anthem in the midst of long days and even harder nights. But caregiving can also test your faith. Let's just be honest. Watching someone you love decline, suffering through their pain with them, or shouldering responsibility without relief can stir questions you never thought you'd ask. Why is this happening? Why now? Where is God in this? Those moments are not signs of weakness. They are part of the raw honesty of walking through hardship. Because faith is not the absence of questions. It's the choice to hold on when answers are slow to come. And for those who don't identify as Christian, the principle is the same. You need an anchor, something that grounds you when the emotional storm of caregiving threatens to sweep you away. For some, that anchor may be another spiritual tradition, meditation, mindfulness, nature, art, music, or a core set of values. Whatever it is, you must lean heavy on it to steady your heart and mind daily. Faith, or your chosen anchor, also provides perspective when caregiving feels unfair or overwhelming. It whispers that your worth is not measured by how perfectly you perform, but by the love and presence you bring. It reminds you that rest is not selfish, but it's survival. Most of all, it affirms that you are not alone. Whether you believe in God's presence or the sustaining power of your chosen grounding practice, you are held by something larger than yourself. And that truth can carry you when nothing else can. Caregiving is not meant to be a solo mission, but too often caregivers wear their independence like an armor, believing they have to be the strong one, the constant one, the one who never lets go of the wheel. The truth, even the strongest caregivers need a break. We call caregivers like nurses and doctors and those that work in the healthcare field and those that care for patients superheroes. And when I think about that, I often think about, for example, Superman. Superman is this powerful being who is able to do any and everything and save any and everybody. But Superman has a kryptonite. There's always something that will cause us to be powerless and overwhelmed and unable to do what we normally are able to do. So even the strongest caregivers, you guys need a break. So respite is not a luxury. Let's just say that. It's actually a lifeline. Planned intentional rest allows you to replenish the physical, emotional, and spiritual reserves that caregiving steadily drains over time. Without it, burnout doesn't just knock, it moves in and literally takes over your life. Research consistently shows that caregivers who take regular respite, whether through family rotation, maybe adult daycare programs, respite services, or short-term facility stays, they actually have lower stress and fewer health problems, and they have greater emotional stability. Yet asking for help is often one of the hardest things caregivers find to do. Many caregivers feel guilt for stepping away, as if leaving for a few hours or days means abandoning their loved one. But respite is not abandonment. It's stewardship. It's stewardship over your health, stewardship over your life, stewardship over your mental, physical, emotional self. It's caring for the caregivers so they can continue to care well. Now, community plays a crucial role here as well, whether it's family members, friends, neighbors, a church body, a support group, or a professional network. Surrounding yourself with people who understand the journey can make all the difference. My God. Sometimes you need someone to take over for a shift. Other times you need a safe space to cry without judgment, laugh without guilt, or simply talk without having to explain every single detail, right? Because a lot of times people who are not in that capacity don't necessarily understand the things that you're saying. So if you are a person of faith, your faith community can be a source of tangible help, delivering meals, sitting with your loved ones so you can step out, or praying with you when you feel overwhelmed. If faith is not your path, look for the communities that align with your anchor, whether that's a local meditation circle, an art group, a caregiver support forum, or neighbors who genuinely care. The reality is this: caregiving is not sustainable in isolation. Okay, let me say that again. The reality is caregiving is not sustainable in isolation. The load is too heavy for one pair of hands, one heart, and one body. Respite and community are not signs of weakness, they are signs of wisdom. They're the safety nets that keep you from falling through the cracks while you hold someone else up. Caregiving is one of the most profound expressions of love a person can give. It is a role that will stretch you beyond what you thought you could endure and show you depths of compassion you never, ever knew you had. But it is also a role that can break you open, leaving you raw and wondering if anyone truly sees the cost. If you are a caregiver today, hear this. The grief you carry matters. The exhaustion you feel is real. And your needs are just as important as the person you care for. You are not less loving for needing a break. You are not selfish for wanting to breathe. You are human, and your humanity is worth preserving. Whether you whether you came to caregiving out of a deep calling, or because there was no one else, your presence in this role is an act of courage. And in that courage, you are allowed to set boundaries, to ask for help, to say, I can't do it all, and to rest without apology. Your caregiving is courage. It is courage. You are allowed to set boundaries in your courage. You are allowed to. If you are a person of faith, let your faith remind you that your worth is not in how much you accomplish, but in the love you give and the love that you allow yourself to receive. So it's a two-way street, guys. If faith is not your path, hold tightly to the anchor that steadies you. Like, return to it often. Let it be your safe harbor in the storms of this journey. And above all, I want you to remember, you are not alone. There is a community of caregivers who understand the unspoken language of this life, the glance that says, I get it, the shared stories that make you feel less invisible, the gentle reminder that we were never meant to carry this load alone. So today, give yourself permission to breathe, permission to pause, permission to grieve what has changed and still find joy in what remains. The work you do is sacred. The love you give is seen. And you, weary hands, tender heart and all, are worth caring for too. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Permission to Breathe podcast. I hope today created space for you to breathe and find peace on your journey. I invite you to join me again next Monday for another episode as we continue to navigate this path together. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share the podcast. Until next time, take care and keep breathing unapologetically.